was gonna start off by I'm gonna tell you about a journey, but it wasn't the journey that June and I just had coming up. It was what a beautiful day to go for a ride, and it was fantastic coming up from Connecticut. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having us. But now the journey I'm going to tell you about is this crazy museum that we have going down there. During the convention or any other time, has anybody been to the museum from up here?
I think I was at the museum once. I did that, and I stopped at the trolley museum.
Yep, just up the street.
Just up the street, and I rode the trolley.
Perfect. So now all we got to do is get the rest of these guys to come down, right? Yeah, we'll be all set. I think it sounds like a good bus trip, Jim. You know, chip in, come on down for fun. But yeah, I got to tell you right off the top. I know you're all hams. I am not. Don't throw me out of here. You know, I know how it is. But no, I did not get into this through being a ham, and that's what I'm going to tell you about is how this all started and how this thing just took off, and it's got a leg of its own going now. But I was a public school teacher. I just retired in 2010, started back in 1975, and I was an industrial arts / tech ed teacher. You know, we evolved through all those manual arts and everything else, depending on how far back you go. When I came out of college, I thought I was going to be a woodshop teacher and a drafting teacher. And I went to work at Southington High School down in Southington, Connecticut. They had a huge program. They had everything under the sun. And when they hired me, I was like the extra man. They had more shops than they had people to teach them. And so I was the journeyman. And I traveled around and did all the different shops. I taught everything that was there, which at the time was very, very difficult. But in the long run, I got a wonderful education because I was so well-rounded with everything. One of the areas they were having a hard time keeping a good teacher in was the electronics lab. They would hire somebody who was really steeped in electronics, who's way the heck up here, and he'd blow the kids away and they'd get out of control, and that was it. You know, and so they were looking for a good electronics teacher, and after a few years of teaching, just 3 or 4 years into my teaching career, they said, well, John, you can teach, so how about you teach electronics? Now, I got to tell you, in college, I took one electronics course, and the same thing happened. The electronics teacher was way the heck up here, and the students were down here, and he blew us away with all these formulas all semester long. In fact, I think he realized it at the end because he had one of those exposed radios, you know, the radio all laid out on a board with all the parts. And the last day of class, he decided, I think he should teach us something practical instead of all the theory. And so he pulled that thing down, and he fired it up and had it running, had a nice station coming in, and he pulled the plug on the filter capacitor. And went, and he said, well, that's what a filter capacitor does. And that's what I walked away from that class with, was the knowledge of what a filter capacitor does. The rest was lost. So now they're asking me to teach electronics. So I said, okay. And I started to read the book and, you know, staying a couple pages ahead of the kids type of thing, and spent a year or 2 doing it and kind of got into it after a while. And back then I used to love to go to flea markets and tag sales, and one day I went to a flea market, and there's this little vacuum tube radio sitting there with like a $5 price tag on it. I said, well, maybe with my newfound knowledge I can buy that and fix it and make it work. And I did. That was my first mistake. Before I knew it, I had like 200 of them around the house, and I was an avid collector. Everything that I saw, I bought, and I fixed up and got going, and was having a lot of fun with it. At the time, we lived in an old Victorian house down in Britain, and they worked in beautifully, especially the wooden cabinets with the woodwork in the house. And we'd have parties, and people would come over, and immediately they were the icebreaker in terms of, you know, conversation. Wow, what is that? So that's a radio. Oh, they wanted to hear all about it. So I realized there was an interest in this, and I started to then put out a few displays around local libraries and so forth, and they were very well received. And so eventually we decided to see if we could take it to the public. Being an educator, I knew there was educational value in the history of electronics, and I thought we'd try and share it. So at the time we were living in Britain, there was this little hole-in-the-wall house down on the corner of Arch and Wallace Street, which was in a pitiful location of the city. And it was like 500 square feet of space, so we rented it and turned it into what we call the 5 decades of radios. And I went for every free advertising system that I could, and people came. It was amazing. This is the place. It's on the corner of Wallace and Arch Street. I I had a high-tech security system there because I was very, very concerned about the neighborhood. It was not a good neighborhood. So in the side of the door, on the right-hand side, I drilled 2 holes, a little hole for an LED and a bigger hole for a key switch, and I ran 2 wires out of that and up into the ceiling, the suspended ceiling, put a resistor and a 9-volt battery up there. Every night when I locked that place up, I very religiously and ceremoniously put the key in, turned the key, the little red light came on, and I walked away, and nobody ever touched it in the years that we were there. Nobody messed with anything. It was great. But it's interesting what happens when you do this. Things that you don't think about happen. And initially it was just me, and I was running on Saturdays and Sundays. And so, you know, Monday through Friday, I wasn't even there. And I'd come in Saturday to open up, and you see that little door stoop where those people are standing, it would be chock full. It was packed with what we call orphans, donations that came in. From everything, radios, tubes, manuals, books. And down to the left was a little basement area, which I was not renting, but I had to put the stuff somewhere. I don't know who that young guy is there, but he's a pretty handsome looking dude. So the overflow is just huge, and I didn't know what to do with the stuff, and so we just started to fill up the basement. And this was our first welcome counter there, and now we had a display of the old headphones and the old battery sets and all the decades of radios. One of the other things we started doing in those first 3 years in that first location was we put on swap meets. And again, initially I thought I was the only one interested in this stuff, and all of a sudden these guys started coming out of the woodwork and bringing all these radios to sell and swap and trade, and we started running 4 swap meets a year in the yard outside of the museum, and it got to be a lot of fun. So this thing just took off and started to grow. Well, what happened about a year and a half later, we opened in September of 1990, by the way. If you do your math, we are now in our 25th year coming up this September. So we are going to have a 25th anniversary celebration on September 26th. I invite all of you come down and attend it at least that Saturday night.
Will you be serving Virginia baked or honey baked ham?
Whatever you request. Whatever you request.
Just
Modify,
remember, we're all
we'll
hands.
modify the menu. So the thing that happened, we just started to bust the seams of this little building. The basement filled up. The landlord started getting nervous. And but what developed in this time was I originally started it with radios, and a guy came forward, actually a former student of mine, or at that time a present student of mine, young kid in high school, had enough foresight to start collecting old TVs. And he had a collection of old TVs. He said, John, why don't we put old TVs in there? So we cleared some of it out, put old TVs in. We did a feature display of old TVs. And then another fellow from East Hartford appeared, and he said, I've got a collection of motion picture equipment. I said, oh, really? So we cleared a part of that up, made a motion pictures section. And it just started to blossom from there. But a year and a half into this stay this year, that year and a half I want you to take and put in the back of your head and remember that, because that's an important number. Year and a half into this, we were busting the seams of this place. The landlord was going nuts. We ended up moving out into Britain, going to Avon, and I started searching for a new location, thought we had a couple, and it all kind of fell through. But the new house I bought up in Avon had a big barn in the backyard. So the collection went to the barn. I had to go back into grad work because I took over the department chairmanship with that department, and so everything went in mothballs for about 3 or 4 years. But like I said, there was a group of guys who were helping out at the museum. So for actually about 2 to 3 years, we would meet around my kitchen table every other Friday night over donuts and coffee. And in our travels, we'd all look for buildings that looked like they needed somebody to occupy them, to take care of them. And we would identify the owners, and then we would go and give them our proposal and see what they would do. And many times we talked to town managers and mayors and so forth and said, hey, you know, your old firehouse down the street would be a really cool place to have a radio museum, right? Most of them didn't get it. You know, as we walked out from our proposal, you could hear our book being dropped into the round file, and that was it. But eventually, Bob DiCrescenzo was mayor in East Hartford, and he was trying to revitalize East Hartford, and they bought up some of the buildings fronting Main Street there to refurbish them. They put new fronts on them, and this was the Comstock building in East Hartford. And they wanted an attraction in there, so we worked out a deal with them, and they gave us 1,600 square feet of space in the center of the Comstock building at a very reasonable price. And after the museum had been closed for almost 4 years, it reopened in East Hartford in this location. It was fantastic. They put the letters in the front for us. And vintage, you can't see it real well, but it's Vintage Communications Museum across the front. I mean, obviously, street front walk-in facility, and we loved it. We thought this was great. Here's the ribbon cutting with the mayor and some of the volunteers in the museum at their opening day. This is 1996 by now. Like I said, a couple of years into Britain and then about 4 years in mothballs. Doors wide open, ready for business. This is before we opened, actually. We were actually working on the interior of the building. And we put up a nice display of early battery sets and everything else that was in there. And again, people started coming. It was amazing to me that people came. One very important person, you guys may not know him as well up here, but down in the Hartford area, the icon of the Hartford area was a guy by the name of Bob Steele. No? Who knows Bob Steele? No, he was totally out of the area. Bob Steele was on WTIC for 6 decades, okay? At the end, he was only on part-time. He'd be on like one Saturday a month, but he continued to broadcast for 6 decades, and he was just the voice of Hartford.
When Bob Steele first went on the air, he added to WTIC the da-da-da-da at the top of the hour.
Yep, yep.
And he's been off the air now, and they continue da-da-da-da on the top of the hour.
Right, right. Yep. Oh yeah, there's a lot of amazing things he did. One of the things he did, as far as we know, he is the only broadcaster who ever sold dead airspace. Because WTIC is at 1080 kilocycles, and there's another station in Texas that's at 1080 kilocycles, and at certain times of the day, with the two broadcasting, focused antennas in the same direction, middle of the country got 2 signals. And the FCC says, oh no, we can't do that. So their solution was to have synchronized switching of their antennas to change the focus of the antenna away from each other at night when the signal carried better. So it's around dawn and dusk that they make the switch. And now they do it and they don't say anything. You hear the news coming on and the person's talking away, and then all of a sudden the voice goes away for like 3 seconds, and then it comes back and nobody knows what it is. Back when Bob Steele was on in the morning, he capitalized on that, and he got Sasco Oil to sponsor the antenna switch. So what he would do, he says, oh, it's antenna switch time. This antenna switch is brought to you by Sasco Oil. And now the news. He sold dead airspace. Probably the only guy in the world that sold it. Anyways, he loved what we were doing, and came and gave a talk one Saturday. We had about 60 people there. He was scheduled to come in for like 45 minutes. 3 hours later, he's still going. He was a great guy, fantastic guy. Sadly, he passed away not too long after this, so we lost his support, but that was at the East Hartford location. Now, remember that 1.5 years I told you about? Well, realized we were in a building that the town owned, had fixed up, and we're hoping to sell. Well, we fixed it up a little bit better because we fixed up the main floor on the inside, made it all look good, and guess what? It sold. And the dentist office wanted it. So, guess what? We were out again, 1.5 years. Well, the whole time we were down there, just about 4 doors down on the right, we were watching up the street, and there was an old IHOP building. The old A-frame IHOP building was sitting there. And we've been watching it for the 1.5 years we were there, because we come to this diner right next to the AAA diner for lunch, and this parking lot overlooked the old IHOP building. It had been vacant, it was full of cardboard boxes and the whole bit, so we went to the town and asked them about it. They said, oh, so-and-so owns it, go talk to him. So we did. The for sale sign was already in front of the building, by the way. But he said, yeah, I just got jumped in there. He says, we'll work out a deal. So we worked out a good deal and rented the IHOP building. And in the middle of a snowstorm, I forget what month it was, but it was, I think it was the end of the winter. And we happened to pick a date to move everything, and it snowed. But we paraded everything up the street. I had about 60 volunteers show up, and everybody just grabbed something and either threw it in a cart or put it on a dolly and rolled it up the street and brought it into the IHOP building. And we were then into our 3rd location. There it is. That's the IHOP building. Now, it was kind of run down, a beat up building, and we said we can't have a museum in a run down, beat up building, so we fixed the building up for the guy. We painted the roof, it was a tin roof, we painted the sides and the whole thing, it looked really good. We had swap meets and all kinds of neat things going on there. This was 2,200 square feet of space, by the way. Remember, we went from 500 to 1,600, now we're at 2,200 square feet of space. I don't know if you can picture it, but if you remember going to the old IHOP buildings, that's right where the benches would be, the counters would be in front of the checkerboard windows there. Yeah, that's a telephone display there. But it was a beautiful little facility, very, very nice. There's our TVs. So like I said, we've been diversifying, creating some neat displays. While we were there, we started going to the Big E. We found out in the Connecticut building that they had no space for museums in Connecticut. That kind of bugged me. So what we did, we snooped around and found out that they would have displays that wouldn't stay for the whole exhibition. They'd be there for 5 days and then they'd pull out, and 3 days later another exhibit would come in. I said, well, what's happening on the 3 days? And they said, nothing, it's empty. I said, can we take it? They said, sure, okay. So we would hop our display in there whenever there was a vacancy during the Big E and set it up and run it. And it was fantastic. We reached thousands and thousands of people, and we had huge upswing in attendance at the museum when we got back home, and it was really cool. So this was some of our Big E experiences here. Right inside the front door, as a matter of fact, for this one. They just had that space open, so we lugged our stuff up there and showed it off. Well, remember that 1.5 years I was telling you? We fixed that building up, and guess what? It sold a 1.5 years later. So we were out again. We went to the town leaders at East Hartford and said, listen, we're getting booted again. Do you have anything else for us? And they thought a while and came up with this place down here. This was called Town Hall Hardware. And this building was down at the other end of Main Street, right next to I-84. Now, I-84 coming back from Boston is here. The roof of the building was like here. It was within 20 feet of the highway. But it was so cool. This used to be a hardware store, and you see that white band up top there was a 50-foot neon sign that said East Hartford Town Hall Hardware. And what we did is we bought melt glass, plexiglass, put it across the front of it, and then got black plexiglass and cut out all the letters, and we put it on front. So when you lit up the neon sign behind it, was all lit from that. But the cool thing was that everybody coming back from Boston couldn't miss that sign. I mean, it was right at their face, right there. When this place used to be a hardware store, what they did to advertise, they would take a mannequin and put it on the roof, and in the summertime they put a bathing suit on it, give it a lawnmower, and there's this guy pushing the lawnmower across the roof of the hardware store. And then wintertime came along, they took the lawnmower out, put a snowblower up there, put a big parka on the mannequin, and he was up there blowing snow all winter long. So everybody knew it was a hardware store. It had great exposure. 5,000 square feet of space. All flat, so you can walk in, no handicap, accessibility problems or anything. And so we opened up. And this is one of our swap meets again. It was a fantastic space. This is 1999, as you can see. And there it is, beautiful green tile. We won't talk about what was in the tile, but asbestos tile. All the old buildings.
Isn't that your fourth home?
Hmm?
Shouldn't that say fourth home?
Shouldn't that say fourth home?
Oh, that's right. Oh, we were putting my slideshow together. This one, yeah, let's see. Britain, East Hartford, East Hartford, East Hartford. That's 4. You're right. This is mislabeled. But you see the petitions here. There was one of the volunteers and friends of the museum worked at the old new departure plant in Bristol, which was the biggest automotive plant on the East Coast under one floor. And the way they divided it up, they used housing panels. And they were starting to repurpose the building, and the housing panels were being thrown out. So he grabbed them for us. So we used housing panels to divide off all the displays that worked really well. We're still using them today. I mentioned those orphans. This is the back room. This is a small part of the back room, again, of the fourth home. And this stuff just kept piling up and piling up. It was unbelievable. We got into instrumentation, test equipment. We actually are the keepers of the standard volt. Many of you guys, you probably know the standard volt, right? Because you work with analog equipment. And to standardize that, there was, back in World War I, there was the German standard, previous to World War I. And a group of Americans realized that we were going to be cut off from that standard for our industry because it was obvious we were going to go to war with the Germans. and Marion Epley was the leader of that group out in Newport, Rhode Island, and he set up the Epley Corporation. They began building their own standard cells. And long story short, one of our volunteers went out there to visit their company back in the mid-90s, and they said, yeah, you know, analog stuff is going out, it's all going digital. We're going to take this whole area and just back up the dumpster and throw it out. It was a one-of-a-kind industry. The only other ones that had done anything like that was Weston. But you go to the standards division down in the Standards Bureau down in Washington, D.C., and you look at their standard cells, and guess what? They were all Epley cells. So with a bunch of finagling and dealing, and about 10 caravan rides out to Newport, Rhode Island, and back with trucks and buses and everything else, we gathered up all of the standard cell division of Epley Corporation, and it's in our collection. So we are the keepers of the standard book now, which is kind of cool. One of the fun things we had there too is Crosley, who made radios, also made cars, and there's a group in Connecticut who collects them. So one day at one of our swap meets, I lined up for the Crosley car collectors to come in, and it was really funny because our building was behind a strip mall. They had built a strip mall in front of it. And so these guys pulled in with them on trailers in front of the front building, offloaded them, fired them up, and everybody's out there picking through stuff in the typical flea market doing this, you know. And then these little cars come in and they all go, oh my God, and this, you know, these little things about this big all go parading by, about 10 of them. And they park them over by the highway. That buffer, that barrier there is the edge of the highway, the raised highway section. So we have all kinds of fun stuff that we do. But here's some of the pictures of the Crosleys that we had. We got to get them back again. This was a while ago. Crosley cars. Crosley made not only radios, televisions, refrigerators, stoves, and cars. And we actually have a refrigerator in the collection that has a radio in it. It was a Crosley. It was the Crosley Shelvin radio refrigerator. One of only 3 we know of in existence today. So. Ooh! That's another building. Well, as life would have it, a year and a half later, there's that year and a half again, the other building I was just showing you had to come down because the state decided to widen the highway. Like I said, we were within 20 feet of the highway. And this was our 4th move, going into our 5th building. We thought we were done. We were about ready to throw in the towel at that point. We had moved ourselves so many darn times. But a couple things happened because we didn't own the building, we were just tenants. I said, that's it, we're out in the street. A state representative called me up and said, you guys are up and going an entity in that building that we're taking, we have to compensate you. I said, oh really? He said, yeah, you know what we need you to do? We need you to take an inventory of all your collection. It took all hands on deck, a month and a half. We had to weigh and measure everything we had. You saw those pictures of the back room. That was just small sections of the back room. But it did. It took us about a month and a half. It came up with a whole list of everything we had. We sent copies of that list out to the 5 major movers in the area. And everybody want to guess what the cheapest cost to move our collection was?
15,000? Oh. 47,000.
No, too high.
Oh.
$32,000 to move the collection. That's how many of those orphans have been dropped off at our doorstep. Realize at this point I'm not collecting anymore. I don't need to. I don't go out flea marketing anymore. So then they said, oh yeah, yes, all right, then we'll give you $32,000 to help you move the collection. In fact, we're going to throw another $10,000 on top of it because you got to change all your advertising, you got to do all this stuff. Okay. Okay. So the state's going to throw us $42,000. I had one question for them. I said, listen, in the previous 4 moves, I said, we've always moved ourselves. If we move ourselves, do we still get the $32,000? He said, sure, no problem. Realize $32,000 to you and me sounds like a lot of money. To the state who's going to do a multi-billion-dollar highway widening project, they're pulling change out of their pocket and throwing it at us to say, get the heck out of the way. That's what they were doing. So I said, okay, fine. So we let it be known in the greater Hartford area that we're looking for another location, and Windsor pops up with this building called the Rappaport Building. Now there's no picture that I have here that does justice to this building. This building is an 85,000 square foot industrial complex. You're looking at the end of it. It goes and goes and goes and goes that way, and then it turns a corner and goes and goes and goes that way. So when we got into this building, we used to use bicycles to get from one to the other. I swear. There was a freight elevator in there big enough to take a Volkswagen up to the floor, easily. You might even been able to get two in at once. But wonderful history. This thing was, this end that you're looking at here is the A part of the building, which was the oldest part of the building. Remington Firearms used to be in there, making munitions and guns. The tobacco industry was in there. Eddy Electric was in there making dynamos and generators way back when. Okay. ABB, actually Combustion Engineering, which eventually became ABB, you may be familiar with that, was in there. They were the last ones in there. See the sign going across it? That was our sign that we had on the East Hartford building in front of the neon. It just fit. It was perfect. So I guess this was the building we were supposed to go to. But anyways, there was a young developer that wanted to develop the building. He was working for the owner, who was a retired fellow who lived in Florida. Okay. And so he talked to us. We thought Windsor's nice the whole bit. The building was really cool. The history was neat. So we said, okay. So we moved into the building. It was not handicapped accessible. Stairs everywhere. It was not up to code anywhere. But the town of Windsor was very good. They turned a blind eye and said, okay, go ahead and operate. You know. And so we were able to open kind of unofficially and have people come in. And we operated in this building. And it was kind of cool. Well, within a short period of time, the developer couldn't get anybody else in there. They had a drop dead date that he was supposed to get the package together and couldn't do it. The owner throws them out. So now we're in this big vacant building by ourselves with no developer and an owner who lives in Miami, Florida. So we just kept operating to see what happened. And one night I got a phone call late at about 10:30. I said, who the heck is calling me at this time? And the voice on the other end of the phone was John Moynihan, who was the owner of the building. And he was calling me from Miami, Florida. And he said, hey, I heard about this museum that's up there in my building. And he said, tell me about it. And we just kind of hit it off and talked and chatted and found out, you know, he was in the Pacific when my father was in the Pacific during World War II. We did that kind of stuff, you know. And after about a half an hour, we hung up, and I said, well, that was really pleasant. And didn't think anything more of it. A couple nights later, he calls me back again, and he says, John, why don't you buy the building? This is an 86,000 square foot industrial complex. It's huge. Now understand, the way we operate is all volunteer and all private funding. There's no federal funding for our museum. Even though we've been around for 25 years, we've had a few specific grants for specific projects, but no operational grants. It's all done basically hand to mouth. Okay? And he's telling me to buy a building. I said, oh, really? This is the parking lot where the picture's being taken in the railroad station where the cars are parked is the railroad tracks. It was right along the side of the railroad tracks.
Old New Haven.
What's that?
It's the old New Haven.
Yes, going straight south to New Haven, Springfield down through New Haven. Yep. So I went to the town and the economic development people, and I talked to them. I told them what had happened. They said, you know, let me tell you a story. They said he has owned that building for ages, made millions off of it. There was even a rumor that was put around that he originally won it in a card game. Somebody told me that. But anyways, they said he wants out from under. They said offer him $100,000 for the building. I said, you crazy? For an 86,000 square foot industrial complex, you're gonna be offering him 100, and he'll shoot me. He said, no, do it. So I called him back one night and I held the phone way out here so I could use the black. And I said, John, would you take $100,000 for the building? And without a second of waiting, he said, you betcha, and I'll take the mortgage back for you. Now we're sitting on $42,000 from the state. Don't forget, from the previous building, there's our down payment. Woo! We're in business. So we took a $70,000 mortgage with him, put $30,000 down, had about $15,000 to play with, and we owned the building. We bought the building. We spent the next 5 years. Well, let's wait on that. We spent the next 5 years courting every major developer from Boston to New Jersey. They came in, they would draw up their beautiful plans and their sketches and everything else, and lay out this whole plan to either turn it all into condos or, you know, turn it into mixed use. But none of them would condo with us. We just wanted to keep a section of the building for us, sell the rest off, would be mortgage free, would be good for perpetuity. Perfect. None of them would do it. They all wanted to buy the whole building and then rent it back to us. They would stop the conversation there, but I knew what the rest of the conversation was. So then, in a couple of years, we would kick you out and buy the whole building. That's what they wanted to do. There was a group out in California, in the San Francisco area, the Parent Foundation. I don't know if any of you know about the Parent Foundation, but they had the best early collection of radio technology on the West Coast. And they were on a state college campus, in one of the state college buildings, had a 99-year lease, and they were all set. They said, oh, this is good. Well, the enrollment in state colleges in California went up all of a sudden, and they needed space, and so guess what? That 99-year lease got torn up and disappeared, and they said, sue us. And they threw them out. And they could barely scrape together enough money to get trailers to put their collection in. They spent close to 15 years in court battling to sue the state. They finally won and got $240,000. How do you build a museum with $240,000? Sounds like a wonderful sum, but it's not enough to start a museum, so they lost. And we knew this was going on, actually, at the time. We knew it was going on, and I said, we're not going to be the parent foundation of the East Coast. So I said, no to all of them. For 5 years this went on. Finally, it was obvious no developer was going to come to this. They just wouldn't do it. So I went to the town. This was the last major redevelopment downtown Windsor. Downtown Windsor, very, very nice. And so we went to the town and said, listen, we moved 5 times. We don't want to move again. But obviously, we're blocking your last redevelopment of downtown Windsor. If you find us another place, we'll consider going there. And they very quickly came up with this, which is our current, notice current, that's good, I like that word, current, 6th home. This is 115 Pearson Lane. It's an 18,000 square foot light industrial building. It had environmental issues. The previous owner had cleaned the property up. There's a few wells that have to have their final tests. Put a new roof on it, but basically it was a shell of a building. Nothing much inside. And we were actually going to have a simultaneous sale, you know, in reality it was going to be just beautiful. And we saw that one buy this one the same day, and it was all good. Well, the other building, the big old building, the property had been subdivided so many times, the building had become landlocked. You know, we finally came to agreement with the developer, and when they started to do their due diligence, look into it, they had no public access to the property we were trying to sell. So it didn't go smoothly. It took about a year for them to get that all straightened out. So we ended up supporting 2 buildings for a year, paying rent in this building and still paying the mortgage to John Moynihan, the other building. But we finally closed the deal, sold that building for profit, and bought this building for $600,000. We got a $400,000 mortgage on it. We have a tenant in the back that helps pay the mortgage, but we are in our 25th year and we're still solvent. Isn't that crazy? Every time I tell this story, I shake my head. But yeah, this is where we are now. Believe it or not, hold on to your seats. Everybody sitting down. We've been here for 9 years. 9. Don't tell anybody. But yeah, we think we put down roots because we now own the building, and as long as we can pay the mortgage, we'll be all set. This is in our lobby right here. We need a little Crosley console sitting next to the old refrigerator. We sell soda, Avery soda out of there. There's a local bottling firm down there.
Does the building or the organization have an income to pay the mortgage?
Kind of. It's funny, I've had a lot of financial types come through and tour the museum. It's really funny because they ask the same question. We don't have a real major one. What we do, we have admission, which is very small, basically. We have annual memberships, which is still not really big. We have a huge vacuum tube warehouse in the back because all the vacuum tubes have been donated. We sell vacuum tubes all over the world.
Really?
And the big thing we're using now is eBay. Remember those orphans that we used to get in back into Britain? They're still coming. They have not stopped. In fact, we have gotten very discretionary in terms of what we do or do not take in. But we get so much stuff taken in, it's either duplicate or we don't need it to tell the history. So we have to make these very serious decisions, and then we say, well, that's not something we need to tell the history. If it's good enough, the quality is good enough, we put it up on eBay. We have a sequence that runs every week. Most of the volunteers are there on Saturday. We'll select items on Saturday. We have a table in the back, which is a photo stand, and the guys will photograph them. They will enter into the computer all the description that eBay will ask me for to put the item up on eBay, and they post all that, the pictures and everything up on Dropbox. And then I go home, and if I'm not doing anything Saturday night or Sunday night, I will list, we do 8, 10, sometimes 12 items a week, and I list them up on eBay, and then we put them on for a 5-day sale, so they sell by Friday night, and by the next Saturday, most people have paid, or we know it's sold, and I generate the labels, they put them on the box. Oh, by the way, the previous Saturday, they not only photograph them and describe them, they package them, weigh the package, and measure the package. So we know exactly what the shipping cost will be. And so By the time that people buy them, they know exactly what they're getting. And so the next Saturday, we take the previous Saturday's sales, put the labels on them, throw them in my car, and I drop them off at UPS at the United States Post Office on Monday, when we start the sequence over again. And that's our biggest income producer right now. We just had a swap meet this past Saturday. We were pulling about $800 to $1,000 on a swap meet. We do 5 of them a year. So it's a lot of little things, donations. We do crystal radio building. You guys all know what crystal radios are, right? Well, I do tons of Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, homeschooling groups, private schools. I have a school group coming on April 30th. We're gonna have 53 kids building crystal sets. And we generally charge 20 bucks a set. And it costs us maybe $5 to put the set together, so it's like a $15 profit for each kid. We're hoping it's gonna be a really nice day. We're gonna set tables up outside where there's enough room and have 53 kids out there building.
My grandfather used to build his own crystal sets a century ago.
Yeah. Well, it's cool. It takes about an hour and a half, and you know, the kids start out doubting. They say, "We have a toilet paper tube to wind the coil on. And how's a toilet paper tube going to receive radio?" You know, and they put it all together, and we take it. We've got a soundproof studio, so that's our radio shack. That's our listening booth, and we go in there and I position the parents at the right place at the other end of the table. As soon as the kid puts it in, we show them. I said, "That's what you want to capture with your cameras." Here we come home. So, yeah, we have a lot of fun with that, but that's it. I mean, that's basically our financial situation. We just have a lot of little income streams that come in, and it works. What do you do with old dud tubes? Chest sets.
Basin full.
There you go, yeah, solid state replacements. Well, what do you do with a dud tube when you mean you're gonna hide it underneath the tube?
You cut the glass,
Yeah.
solid
Oh,
state inside,
yeah.
glue it back on.
You're a maniac, aren't you?
Yes, he is.
We turn them into chess sets,
That's cool.
and we sold one of these on eBay just recently. But those are all handmade. The board itself is handmade because it's got to be a special size.
Right.
It's hard to find a good chessboard that's the right size to handle that computer. But that's in our gift shop.
About $10,000 worth of tubes there.
Yeah. Well, they're all done, so they're not worth that much anymore. So we wouldn't put them in the chess set, believe me. European sets, the foreign sets from the 1950s. There's a nice Zenith Entertainment Center with the porthole tube. You know, most of the manufacturers try to make it look rectangular, like the movie theater that everybody would go and see, the movie screen. Even though there's a round tube behind it, they kind of masked it off and made it look rectangle. Zenith said, "Actually, it's a round tube. We're going to show this round." And he made these porthole sets, which are really cool. The AM/FM receiver below that, you can't see it, but the turntable has a Cobra arm tone arc. It's got the eyes of snake eyes on it, and it was factory. They didn't do that afterwards, it was a factory thing.
John, question?
Yeah,
I saw on your website, some procedure, if we or I want to buy a unit through eBay, we can actually search somehow by seller?
yeah, we are our initials, VRCMCT. Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut. VRCMCT is our seller name on eBay.
Okay. Very good.
And it generally goes up Saturday night or Sunday, depending on my schedule. So, yeah, you guys don't want to look at this stuff. Yeah. We have a ham station there, W1 VCM, standing for Vintage Communications Museum. Gordon Horn, the late great Gordon Horn, was the one that started it, one of our volunteers that passed on. But he had worked in the industry long back, all the way back to Armstrong. He had worked with Edwin Howard Armstrong, which is really cool. And so he said, let's set up a licensed ham station. And he pursued the licensing a little bit. And off to the right of this is our little station. The guys just enlarged it because we have probably 35 people in the group now, and it's become quite popular. They have club meetings one Saturday a month, and they're very, very active. But around the ham station, they have all the old ham gear that's on display. Name it, we got it, it's jukeboxes. We have 4, 5, or 6 of them in the collection. We have 3 of them on display. This one, we have an old Wurlitzer 78 player and a Rockola on display. Those are a lot of fun. And they work. 2 of them work at least. They did in the 1930s and the 40s. A number of those American Bosch right out of Springfield, Mass. Again, I know a little bit out of the area. New York is a different world, but we love the local stuff we have. There's the Crosley. There it is, with the refrigerator with the radio in it.
Really?
There's one in the Crosley Museum in California, and there was one we saw go for sale about 15 years ago in private sale. Those are the only ones we know that are left. That was an option. That top panel, there's 4 bolts that hold it on and take it off to the regular panel and have a regular refrigerator. But they don't know how many they sold, how many were out there. But the other thing, that is a shelvador refrigerator. And the reason why they called it a shelvador refrigerator is the first refrigerator with shelves in the door. 1941, we're just coming out of the icebox era. They're starting to jazz up this new technology, putting a white enamel on the inside and nickel-plated shelving. And a guy came up with the idea of let's put shelves on the door, and he patented it. He was an independent. He patented the idea. And he went around peddling his idea to people, and he came to Powell Crossing. Powell liked the idea, so I'll make you 2 offers. He said, I will buy that patent off you, $15,000 cash for you to go walk away. Or, he said, I'll give you 25 cents for every refrigerator we sell with shelves in the door.
Which one did he choose?
Sadly,
Took the
15,000. He took the 15,000. The estimates are, if you've taken 25 cents, well, think about it. Powell Crossing now owns the patent for 17 years. Amana, Frigidaire, Westinghouse, GE, they all had to have shelves in the door. Guess who did? Powell Crossing. Powell was a very, very good businessman. The estimate is over $3 million. The guy would have made it 25 cents per head. So. Just a general wall of radios. The story I tell here, by the way, we give tours, guided tours. If you do come down, we encourage everybody that comes through to take guided tours. Now, it's really funny because people walk up to our front door and pay the $7 for adults, $6 for seniors, $5 for students. And they'll expect to spend 20 minutes there and be out. 3.5 hours later, we're still going strong. Because we don't let them walk around and just look at these things because they get bored, because they don't know anything about it. So we have trained docents who give tours and tell the whole history. And once that starts, they're hooked. And I mean, it's better than a full-length feature. Think about what you pay for a movie. And we can entertain you for longer than that.
Do you sell overpriced popcorn in the?
That's a good idea.
What's that?
But yeah, these are just general radios. You know, in the beginning, when the radio first came out, it was first bought by the consumer, it was a status symbol. And all the radios they wanted huge, big consoles they could put in a very prominent place in their living room, tune it all in, get it ready to go, and invite their friends and go, I got a newfangled radio. They want to brag about it. You know, so everything was these huge consoles that only went in the living room. And the industry bought into that. They said, wow, all right, this is going to be our charge for all of our salesmen. A radio for every home. And that's what they did. They all ran out and started to sell radios like crazy. And in about 5 years, they did that. So they came back to the next convention and they said, oh, what are we going to do? And what they did, somebody in the back row came up with a bright idea and said, how about a radio for every room? And the whole industry changed. And they started to design radios that would fit in the bedroom, in the dining room, in the living room, in the kitchen, the whole bed. And so the design of the radio changed and it became a room-to-room radio.
About when did radios fit in cars or go in cars?
Yeah.
About what year?
Well,
Mid-30s?
yeah, generally mid-30s, Galvin, which eventually turned into Motorola, was the pioneer for that. But we have a picture of early, I don't know, Model A, Model T, some kind of touring car. They've got a battery set strapped onto the sideboard, the running board. They've got the big spiderweb antenna attached to the radiator cap in the front of the car. I mean, the interest in having radio in cars was way back when radio first started, but when it was actually commercialized, it was Galvin, which eventually evolved into Motorola, and probably in the mid-30s. We have an Atwater Kent bolt-on under the dashboard radio. It was an aftermarket bolt-on. And the speaker has this really weird cowling in the back of it. It was designed to sit on the home. So you could aftermarket attach it to the car. It has a radio in the car.
The name Motorola was originally coined because they sold people a Victrola in your motor car.
Right.
So Motorola.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, we have that whole story up on the wall in the museum. Victrola, we have phonograph and film. We have very, very early equipment in above the slope cabinet, you see there's this silent era Powers hand crank projector. That was the workhorse of the silent era. But you can't really see it real well, but down to the left of that is a small portable unit. And a lot of people don't think about how, once Edison invented the movies, how that thing started. The movie theaters weren't there yet, and the movies were ready. So what they did is they were itinerant projectionists. They had a little fold-up device that went into a box. They throw it over their arm. They travel from town to town. They rent a social hall. They had a little DC plug that would go into where Edison's DC light bulb would be, and that ran the projector. They had a variable resistor that allowed the electricity to run the little light bulb. If they didn't have electricity, they carried storage batteries with that lit light. They had a hand crank on it. This is when the film reels were about this big. They were 5-minute shorts. This is when people would flock to the movies and line up around the corner to see a horse run across the street multiple times. You got to realize they'd never seen any artificial motion before. So that was it. There were no epic long movies. There were 5-minute shorts of action. One of the funny pieces I've seen was they think it's a couple technicians from Edison's laboratory. They didn't have anything else to shoot, so these two heavily mustachioed, handlebar guys are dancing. That was it. They didn't show that in the theaters. People would flock to the theaters to see it.
What was ambition?
These are, yeah, the Scott on the left is a beauty. If you've seen Scott's, they chromed everything inside, so the whole chassis and everything is beautiful chrome. You can pull that section out and see it. Motorized tuning, so you can just push a button and it automatically motors to the station. That's a high-end piece over here. I think that's a 300B. The other one's a GE on the other side. Up on top, you can't see it, it's a Lear radio. Lear is in Learjet. Lear was the guy that developed 8-track, right?
Yes, 8
Yes, 8-track. And he was into radio also. He's known for his Learjet, but he was also in the radio, so he had Lear radio there. Of course, no history of communications and electricity would be complete without Nikola Tesla. Thank you. Yes, we have 2 Tesla coils there, both work. We turn all the lights off and fire them up and have a great time. Shoot them off, lighting up long fluorescent tubes. When the kids are there, I take my fluorescent tube and I say, you know Darth Vader, don't you? I got my fluorescent tube, so. A lot of fun. We have a lot of fun. And that was one thing we didn't know was you know, how we would appeal to all the different age groups, and we can appeal to every age group right down. One of the problems we just discovered recently when I bring all the Cub Scouts in to build crystal radios, I used to let them go loose in the display and look at things. Sad thing is, little kids today, the only way they've seen a record played is scratched. I think we have a picture here. We have a Hi-Fi Alley, which was very, very high-end audio equipment. And one day we let the scouts in there, and next thing we hear coming out of Hi-Fi Alley is we lost a whole head and stylus. It was very, very expensive. So I have to sit the kids down because I can't let them go that way. Everything you see here in the cabinet and on top are all Connecticut pieces. We have a Tusca there. We have a Bristol speaker there. There's a lot of stuff. The telephone equipment down the side was Connecticut Telephone and Telegraph. There's a lot of that industry that went on right in Connecticut, so we have a tribute to it in one cabinet, one section there. We have a vacuum tube display. It's fantastic. We just received from the grandson or the great-grandson of Frederick McCulloch. Anybody know who Frederick McCulloch is?
Yes.
Well, he was the guy that invented the first AC adapted vacuum tube. They were put into, Kellogg is the more common one that most people are aware of, but the Kellogg took their design directly from McCulloch. And so we now have a Frederick McCulloch original vacuum tube that we haven't yet figured out where to put on display in here. But it was his grandson or great-grandson that just gave it to us. Recorded sound, of course, we go all the way back. And this is my volunteer. This unit we're looking at right here was a basket case when it came into us. And I got a group of guys that are heavily into control. It's really cool running a voluntary organization. People come in and say, well, I want to volunteer. So they ask me, what do you want me to do? And I tell them, turn it right around and say, well, what do you want to do? Because if you give a volunteer something that they don't like to do one day, they're a one-day volunteer. They never come back again. So I turn the question right around and say, well, what do you want to do? What do you like? And I got a group of guys that love vacuum tubes, and that's why we have a beautiful vacuum tube display, because they are, you know, they're I got a group of guys that love the early Victrolas, and I said, those are your babies, and pretty much give the guys independence to alter the display almost as much as they want. And so they pooled all their resources and put this thing back together and made it work. We have an early Edison cylinder player, thanks to the efforts of the guys. It's our collection of Arcturus blues, or some of them are Arcturus blues. Arcturus was a company that just decided to make glass look blue as a marketing scheme. It has nothing to do with how the tube works, but it made it very collectible today. So, and even the artwork on the boxes is fun, so we got a whole bunch of the boxes down there with that artwork. Oh, I guess that's it. So, yeah, it is crazy. I continue to think about how this all happened and where it went. And in the beginning, if I didn't push it, it didn't go anywhere. Now, if I stand in front of it, it runs me over. It's totally got a life of its own, and it's really cool to see. It draws really great people. We have a ton of great people there that just have a ball of working there. Some of the guys that I had recently, within the last 2 years, Dan Thomas joined us. Dan Thomas was a studio engineer in Colorado for 40 years, and his kids were living here on the East Coast in Connecticut, in Simsbury. And he wanted to be closer to his grandkids. So he retired out there, and he and his wife moved out here. And I think he was surfing the internet one day trying to find something to keep himself busy. And he discovered us. And we have a recording studio that was a grant. Larry and Florence DeGeorge Foundation gave us $40,000 to build a replica of a 1950-ish recording studio. We built it. And when we finished it, nobody had the expertise to run it, so it kind of collected junk. It became a storage room. And Dan Thomas, I gave him the tour, walked him around, we got in there, and his eyes lit up, and he said, "Get the hell out of my way." And we did. And about a month and a half later, he had everything up and running. In that recording studio, we have every form of recorded audio medium there ever was. It is all working and interconnected through a patch panel. So we can go from anything. We have transcription player for the old transcription discs from the early radio stations. We can transcribe those to CD. We can burn them to a CD if we want to. We have a record cutter. So if a garage band wants to come in and actually cut a record, bring it on. We can cut them a record. They can have their one unique cut record.
Did that in 1963 for WCSS in Amsterdam.
There you go.
They had a record cutting
Yep.
machine.
Yep, all studios did, because until the magnetic medium came along, that was the only medium you could record what went out on the air. And then wire. Who knows about a wire recorder?
Wire recorders.
We have working wire recorders in there. We have a recording of the Fred Allen Show from 1949. It is as clear today as it was when it was first recorded. It's amazing. That fine little wire thinner than the hair in your head. And it works beautifully. We got reel-to-reel. We have the home Sony, and then we have the Amperex units for the commercial. We then have an 8-track player that really works. You can play 8 tracks if you want. Cassette player, we have record players, we have, you name it. All the audio medium is there and it's all working. And it's thanks to Dan Thomas. He got in there and went crazy. And then he's building us an interactive TV studio. Our hopes is to be able to have a family come in and have the kids be the talking head behind the news desk, and the parents be the cameraman, or vice versa, however they want to play it. All goes to the director station can then record it to a DVD. They take a copy of their little production home. So we try to do as much interactive stuff as possible. That's taking a lot of technology, a lot of work. We got the weather station, I think, from channel 61 down there, so we have a digital weather station running 24/7. We got all of the rig on the roof, and it's giving us maximum, minimums, temperature, wind and wind gusts and barometers and the whole bit. So it's crazy. We're just there, and this stuff keeps coming towards us. We turned it into something. We were at our swap meet Saturday, and one of the guys was digging stuff out to put on swap meet. He found this industrial slide projector, carousel, thank you, slide projector. And so he said before we put it out, he plugged it in and started running. It was all slides of, the slides that you run before the movies, and it says, remember when Jane Fonda and so-and-so were in whatever movie, there were all of those. We've gotten it to come in, so we took it back in from the swap meet, and we mounted it on top of some of the houseman panels, and we put a screen up in the corner up near the ceiling, and now it's automatic too. It all runs by itself, and it's running those slides up there, trigger slides from before the movies. It's So we make it up as we go. It's really cool, it's a lot of fun. But it's like Christmas every day there, because the guys run in and say, what came in this week? They wanna see what we got this week, and it's so much fun, so. Question?
And my grandfather, who was a telegrapher for the railroad, and in Ghent, Columbia County, came up in the 20s to, I don't think WRGB existed on Walltown Road then, but it was another station of sorts. He came up for the first test of television, which was on site there.
Yep.
I'm not sure the name of the station though, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, yeah.
If there was a station.
Yeah. Jim and I volunteer, who was a former student of mine, show you how old I am, and when he got into the industry, he caught the last tail end of the vacuum tube technology, so he got steeped in vacuum tubes and then went into solid state. And he always loved the vacuum tubes, and he was an avid TV collector, and he found a RCA CT100, which was the very first color TV set, and he fixed it all up and got it running. From our understanding, there's only 20 of them left, and like 5 of them that still work. And so when he finished it, he put it on display in the museum for about a year, and it was like we were Mecca. It was funny. I'd be at the admissions counter, and this guy would come in, and he'd pay his fee, and then he'd say, I heard you have a CT100 here. I said, yes, we do. And he said, I heard it works. I said, yes, it does. You want to see it? He's like, and he would, several of the guys that came in, we had it running with some crazy videotape going for it. And the program was terrible. And they would go over in front of the TV, and they were like this. I thought they were praying to Mecca. It was amazing. But they would stay there. They didn't go look at anything else in the museum. They wanted to see the CT100. The guy, our volunteer friend, finally sold it. I think he got over $10,000 for that TV. And he finally sold it. It was gone. I was so sad. But it was his TV, so. It's crazy. You know, we're open to everything and anything, and stuff comes in. We have, you know, you mentioned telegraphy. We have a whole telegraph. We have the telegraph poles running across the display area and 2 stations at either end. I didn't have any pictures of that. I mean, the tours that take 3.5 hours are just the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg, because we have 4,000 square feet on display. Behind the wall, there's another 7,000 square feet stacked up to here. That's those orphans that have been coming in. So we have much more in storage than we have on display. And then when we give these 3.5 hour tours, we are just hitting the highlights of what we have on display. In fact, I tell people it's funny, they can take a tour with me and then come back the next week and take a tour with Bob Allison or Mark Heiss or one of the other docents. They get a whole different story, a whole different perspective. Same story, a whole different perspective. Because those guys like to highlight different things. You could tour a museum 5 times and get a different story each time. Really kind of cool.
What do you do for the old stuff, like the old insulation? The danger and the old bakelite, have you found new places to buy that, or have you found replacements that are more modern and not so fire?
In terms of restoration, not a lot. We did, at one point, we thought a good way to raise money for the museum was offer to repair old radios. Okay, and I had a number of guys that were skilled in it, so we put advertising out and stuff started to come in. We got a 2-year backlog that we couldn't handle. We finally got out of the business. We just could not keep up. But in terms of restoring things, at this point, we get so much stuff in. If it's cracked, if it's broken, we sell it at the swap meet if anybody wants it, or sadly, we put it in the dumpster. At one point, when we were in that huge building, up to that point, we were pure collectors. We took everything and anything. And people heard that we had that big building. I didn't really tell you, but that big building stayed empty the whole time we were in there, except for us. We filled 3/4 of that 85,000 square foot building with stuff. I had a guy in Waterbury that owned half the Waterbury clock factory building, and he called me up one day and he says, John, I got some records. Would you like them? I said, sure. He said, you better come over and take a look. He had a whole floor of the Waterbury Clock Factory Company building, skids of records stacked this high. And he said, I know you got a big building up there now, so you want them? So we worked out a deal and gave him a big tax write-off, and we trucked those in from Waterbury and filled one wing of that whole building with records. When we had to get out of that building, we had a couple big sales, and we were selling records, any record for like 50 cents a piece. We were begging people to give us, don't even give us anything. Beautiful Zenith console sitting there, take it away, please. We ended up having it rent dumpsters, 30-yard dumpsters, and there was nothing we could do. We were going from 86,000 square feet space to 18,000, and the back 5,000 or 6,000 is rental, which is another income producer to help us float that building. So we really only had like maybe 11,000 square feet space. 86,000 square feet down to 11,000. We had, and now we're very, very selective about what we come in and what we take in. Everything goes through me. I require people to send me pictures and model numbers. If it's something we already have, if we have something in better condition, we turn it back. So it's tough. I mean, I was a pure collector at heart. It was just from, I'm callous now. I'm just terrible because I had to be. I had to be. So.
Do you know about the quote radio museum in Europe? It's online, so it's schematics.
Right,
information.
right.
And I don't know if you have any interchange with them.
Oh yeah, yeah. We use them all the time as a resource, but it's kind of virtual. There's a lot of interesting things going on. I mean, of course, AWA in Rochester. I mean, I cut my teeth on Bruce Kelly. You guys knew Bruce Kelly, I'm sure. But when I first started with this idea back in 1990, we took a trip out to the Niagara Falls, and I called him up and said, Bruce, I'm going to be going through. Can I stop and see? He said, yeah, the museum's not open then, but we'll be down to the annex. So I went down to the annex, and it was a better tour than the museum, that dinky little museum they had then, had all the annex. And I sat down with him and I said, well, Bruce, I'm thinking about starting a museum. He laughed his head off. He laughed and laughed, and then he sat down and gave me all kinds of pointers and stuff. It was great. It was great. East Greenwich, Rhode Island has a steam and wireless museum. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's a steam engine as well as early battery set stuff. I've been in communication with Jacques Hamel out of Quebec, and they have a beautiful collection up there. And he, when he found out about us, he read our website and our whole history. He said, I could have written that history. He's pretty much gone through the same thing that we went through, but he's not having success. And they're at the point where they're breaking up the collection and they're going to sell it. But I told him, I said, we'd do anything we could. I actually had my mayor call his mayor, but it was a French, so there was a language barrier. But the mayor was more than happy to try to convince them that, hey, having a museum in your community is a great thing to have. And he got nowhere. I don't understand it, and again, I mean, I would have gone up there if I could have helped them, but they're all French speaking and I didn't speak French. So he was broken English through emails, we were going back and forth, and I was trying to encourage him in any way he could, but he could not get any support from anybody apparently. You just give him a vacant building to set up and run and invite people in. So they are expanding that collection. They got some very early stuff up there from Marconi, Canadian Marconi. What they're going to do is distribute it to other museums, and then if they have any money left over, they're going to distribute the money to back up the collection that they gave away. So if your museum, you accept some of his stuff, then hopefully it'll have some money coming behind it to help support it. But it's sad. And I mean, we're looking at like, please don't send it that way because we got so much we don't have any space for. But I mean, again, it's some of the stuff is such wonderful things. I mean, early on when I first started this, I figured that's when all the really good stuff was going to come out. But what I'm finding now is as time goes on and they realize the museum has longevity and is a solid organization, better stuff is coming out. We've had some phenomenal things. Some phenomenal things coming through just recently. So, like the McCullough Food. It's crazy.
Well, do you find the tubes are valuable or not valuable?
Yes and no. A lot of the tubes aren't. They're not worth the bead that you shoot them with when you smash them. But others, we had, maybe 8 months ago, we had a Gentle X Red Lion. Does it mean anything to anybody? Didn't mean anything to me either. But my tube guys were like, oh, look at this. I said, we gotta put this up on eBay. One Gentle X Red Lion, it was equivalent to a 12AX7.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? We put it up for the week. I displayed it. They had beautiful pictures of it, description, the whole thing. End of the week, it sold for $560. Good 45 tubes. Audio output 45, the old-fashioned audio. Brand new in box, over 150 a piece. The 12AX7s, we were selling those for about $12 a piece, and we started having this line of young kids coming in the door. They were buying them in quantity. We said, wait a minute, this isn't for your equipment, is it? And one guy finally broke and said, no, we're taking them down to New York and selling them for 3 times what you're selling. We updated our price list. We didn't want to be wholesalers. So, yeah, no, certain tubes, yes, the majority of the tubes, but you don't know.
So
So,
people come to you to buy too?
yes, yeah. We put them up on eBay, and then we let it be known that we had the warehouse. What we have is a big area in the back, cordoned off. We made pigeonholes, 8x8 pigeonholes. We have cardboard boxes that will fit in there, so if we have a ton of that type of tube, we put them on a box, label the box, and put them in the pigeonhole. But the pigeonholes go about 12 feet up. And they're row after row after row, but they're all out from numeric. And then we have probably as many still out in boxes that have not been sorted. We have regular tube sorting parties. Because the flow of tubes in is faster than the flow that we can put them up on the shelves. But yeah, some of them are extremely valuable. We got a batch of Russian tubes in a while back, a special thing. We had a professor from Texas send us a whole bunch of tubes that he had collected. So yeah, it's crazy. It's insane.
I noticed on your brochure, there's one picture that has a TV camera. Do you have much in, say, 50s and 60s TV equipment? You know, studio broadcast.
Yes, yes, but what we were gonna do, which one is shown here?
Somewhere.
Blue one, see it in the middle?
Oh, yeah. That was our original desire, was to get that generation up and going, but they have the 3 primary color tubes that are extremely expensive and short-lived, and it just was not practical. So Dan went to the newer generation, the smaller cams, floor cams, and he's acquired a bunch of those. His compadres out in Colorado keep sending us stuff that we need. He asks them for it, and they ship it out to us. So he is slowly putting that together. But no, we have that camera on display, it's a static display, but no, he said, you're crazy trying to get that up and going.
Anything like tube type videotape machines? That's where years ago I worked for one of the local stations.
We have, see, yeah, this is the thing, I don't know that equipment real well, that'd be a question for Dan, but we do have a big monster that stands about this high with a big 1-inch tape.
2-inch.
2-inch.
Probably.
2-inch tape, yeah. 2-inch tape on it. I couldn't tell you. the
If it was
model.
vacuum tubes, you know, because you see
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's vacuum or not, I don't think it's quite that old, but, yeah, we have a whole studio. What we do is really amazes some people that come in and our TVs are all running and showing things. And they stop and think, wait a minute, everything's digital, how are you doing that? Dan set up a broadcast station in the building and broadcast to the station analog signal. So we have a radio station. The other funny thing is that we go around and turn the radios on, demonstrate it to people, it's all old music coming in. So finally one that says, where are you getting the old music? I said, well, it's an old radio, that's all it is. They think a second, and then, you know, no, we broadcast our own stuff right out of the studio. So we have an AM, and Dan just set up an FM transmitter, so we can do AM, FM, and analog television to our building. So, yeah, it's just, you let these guys with skills and talent come in and just let them know, get out of their way, and it's really cool what happens. Yep.
Something for you, just want to let you know, the first weekend in June
Yeah.
in Albany is the International Radio Restoration Thing.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
people come in from Europe that are experts in repairing the wood veneer.
Yep, yep.
You got people coming in from Puerto Rico that does the repair on the Catlin and the Bakelite radio.
Right, right.
And then we have other people that just get into the electronics. They
Yeah.
do the repair of the condensers. And
I see Jim writing over there, send me information. Yes.
first weekend in June.
I will broadcast the information all
If you
over.
want to come on up, you'd
Yeah.
be an honored guest.
Maybe get some people-
There'll be a whole bunch of these like
Yep.
this.
Yep.
You'll see 100 radios all
Yeah.
lined up.
Cool. Sounds excellent.
What's the name of the exposition? What's the?
It's gonna be at the Shaker Road, Loudonville Firehouse Convention Hall.
Okay, and the name of the activity?
It's,
I'll call you.
call me, I gotta figure it out.
Cool. Yeah, definitely send us information.
Yeah,
We'll network on that.
Matter of fact, one of the electricians that's an expert on Atwater Kent's, the old Zenith from Chicago,
Yep.
the old transoceanic tube set, comes from Uncasville, Connecticut, down by Mohegan Sun.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's amazing people who come through the museum. Early on when we were still in Britain, so I'd have to be in the first year and a half, I had a gentleman come through, and I think his name was Clarence Whiteman. And I started giving the tour, did my pack tour, and he piped up and said, well, you know, he said, I used to work with Commander McDonald. I said, what? And he started carrying on, I shut my mouth, I zipped it, I said, you know, and I let him carry on. And the whole time I'm wishing I could change my thumb into a microphone, stick it in his face. And he started telling me all these wonderful stories. He said he'd be out of Mackinac Island with Commander McDonald, and they would get a call from Chicago, there was a problem with their headquarters. He said, we'd hop on the hovercraft and buzz across the lake. And, you know, I said, this guy was there. It was unbelievable. And so after he left, I ran to my guest book, and he signed his whole name and address in there. He was from California. And so I wrote to him, and I remember the first line of my letter was, I hope you enjoyed your visit to my museum as much as I enjoyed having you there. And I asked him to take the remembrances that he shared with me and put it down on tape. He did and sent it back to me. It was a little more stilted because he wasn't doing it off the cuff, he was doing it at the microphone. But yeah, he shared the information. So it was unbelievable. Some of the people that have come through, and they, like I said, Gordon Horn used to work shoulder to shoulder with Armstrong. It's amazing. I got one volunteer that's still there, Ed Sachs, that worked on the second generation computer. I think it was a relay computer. You know, some of the early stuff to do with them. It's amazing. So, yeah.
Don't forget the hand festivals are up here.
Anything else? You gotta come down. Whether you come down individually as a group, it's a great ride. It's only 2 hours down there. It's neat.
Who's got the sign in? Okay.
So, a couple of things. I'd like to have us thank our speaker. And it's within our budget to offer you a honorarium,
Oh,
which is in the shape of a coffee cup
oh, nice.
with the call letters from the
Yeah.
Schenectady Amateur Radio.
Beautiful. I will put this on display down in the museum.
Excellent.
Along with others that I've collected. Yes, we have a place for that.
Great. And John has brought a few souvenirs. There's quite a range, and then I'm sure we can kind of admire these after the meeting. So
I asked my ham guys for a gem that you guys would like up here, and they came up with a hammer in the middle. That's a beautiful condition working set. There's a couple bands that are not working on it. They were playing with it last Saturday. The clock runs, everything runs on it. It's probably what, dates mid-60s.
If you come up the first weekend in June, bring that. We have the Hammerlin repair guy. He's done 5 of them already
Yeah,
for the group.
yeah,
Bring it, he'll fix those missing bands.
yeah, cool.
Is that a 170 or 180?
That's a lady.
180.
180?
General coverage.
General coverage. The 170 was Hamlin, like, the 180 was general coverage. We'll get that like new.
Yeah.
We'll get that like new.
When I was a teenager, I traded the sister for one of those.